My guest today on Euronews is the Lebanese Minister of Economy and Trade, Amer Bisat. Minister, thanks for being with us. So we'll move to the economy in a minute, but I cannot help but ask you about the ongoing negotiations. So today marks the first day with direct talks between Lebanon and Israel in more than 30 years. Both sides are coming to the table with very different agendas. The Israelis want Hezbollah to be disarmed, and they want to eventually to cling a peace that will last for generations. What is your side expecting from these talks?
The number one objective at this stage is the end of hostilities and the cessation of the violence. Lebanon has paid an extremely high price and continues to pay an extremely high price, both in terms of death, injured, as well as massive displacement. We're very open to negotiations, very open to discussions. The government has is very clear about the idea of wanting to have and establish good relations with all of its neighbors based on sovereignty. But at this point, the objective, the priority is to end the violence and end the war. And this is what our negotiators will be asking for today.
Okay, so because of the time difference, you're in Washington, the negotiations have not started yet. They will in a few hours. Is that it?
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying. But let's address the big elephant in the room, Hezbollah, namely, which to our viewers is not only an armed group backed by Iran, but is also a political party. You have two ministers, if I'm not mistaken, in your cabinet that come from Hezbollah. The speaker of the parliament, rather, is from Hezbollah. You have
He's not. He's an ally.
Affiliated, is close to Hezbollah.
Affiliate, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So Nabi Berri is close to Hezbollah. You have members of parliament that are close or affiliated with Hezbollah. So Hezbollah does not want these talks, and Hezbollah is, whether one likes it or not, part of Lebanon and Lebanese politics. So how do you reconcile the fact that one of the allies, political allies, doesn't want those talks? And you want these talks to happen.
Absolutely. So, madam, listen, at the end of the day, there's both a political, by now a legal, and certainly I would think a collective national consensus for what we would call is the return of the sovereignty of the state. The sovereignty of the state includes, among other things, and perhaps the most important, is this idea that we want a monopoly over the decision of war and peace. No entity in Lebanon, no group in Lebanon has the right to decide when we get into a war and when we get into a peace. No entity has a right at this point to control arms. Only the state, only the sovereign state has the capability and the ability. And this position, the one I just articulated, this idea of a sovereignty is no longer a just decision by the minority. It's the vast majority of the Lebanese population want that. And they've articulated that over and over again, not recently, since the early 90s. Anybody who knows the Lebanese history knows that the end of the civil war was predicated during this period, what we call the Taif Accord. Mm-hmm. That was predicated on the idea that the state gets back its sovereignty. That position got re-articulated and re-emphasized and re-stressed with the new president who came into power in 24. With the new cabinet, the vast majority of the cabinet was very clear. We want the sovereignty of the state. This was repeated again through multiple decisions. The idea being here, there's a collective decision by the whole society for taking over and being a sovereign, taking over arms, control over arms, taking over the decision of war and peace.
I understand that. But beyond statements and beyond the fact that I would repeat what you just said, the vast majority of the population wants peace and security. You have Hezbollah, who does not want to disarm. So how do you manage this? Because any agreement with Israel is conditional on Hezbollah disarming, and so was the ceasefire in 2024.
Absolutely. We've been, and sort of you sort of articulated it as a statement. It's actually more than a statement. It's a position that is political, that has a full force of the Lebanese government's willingness, desire, and recently actions, incidentally. I want to emphasize actions, including the decision last week of calling Beirut, administrative Beirut, as a city empty of arms. The army, the security forces are already implementing it, right? I want to emphasize this point one more time. this goes beyond a political statement. This is a national decision that is articulated in politics and in actions to two things: wanting the end of hostility and the liberation of the South, and the end of hostility by Israel. This is extremely important. We want our people, we want the 1.4 million people to go back to their lands, to their homes. We want to end, we're calling for the end of violence and hostility, but at the same time, the regaining of sovereignty over all decisions that have, in the last 20 years have been robbed and we need to take back control. Can we do that? I would claim we want to. We started. This effort is not recent. As I was saying, this effort started 15 months, 18 months ago. The army did take this control the South. The army has a plan. The government is articulating this plan, wants to do it. Is it easy? Of course not. I'm not naive. Nobody's saying it's going to be automatic or a magic wand.
But Minister, if I may, beyond being easy or not, and I understand it's not easy because you would have done it a long time ago, if Hezbollah refuses to cooperate, refuses to lay down its arms, how can you force them?
We count on, and this is more than just a statement. We're counting on the national consensus at this point that nobody wants violence internally. And we believe strongly that through discussions, negotiations, working with all Lebanese of all sects and all religions, under the premise that I just mentioned, the two-legged premise of sovereignty of the state and liberation of the South, end of hostilities, but at the same time, complete control over the decisions and taking over the arms. We think if we propose it that way, if the proposal is that way, is articulated as a position of complete sovereignty, both in terms of liberating the South, but also in terms of regaining sovereignty. We think the population, the society, including here, I'm going to be a little bit more open and honest, what we refer to as the Shia community, which we believe that they are partners. We are all in the same boat at this stage. And I think if we present it that way, there will be a consensus eventually on this.
Okay, I want to come back very briefly before we move to the economy. To a point you made about regaining sovereignty over Lebanon's full territory. It goes opposite to what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, that and even more contrary to what some of his ministers have said. But going back to Netanyahu, he's made very clear that Israel would have a buffer zone in South Lebanon. And some of his ministers sitting in his very government have said they wanted to annex southern Lebanon. So is it something you're going to talk about during the negotiations? Do you think it can be negotiated?
I mean, as I was saying, the principle of complete sovereignty over all Lebanon, the return of the displaced, the 1.4 million displaced, the beginning of the reconstruction is a crucial part of the way we would think of our politics and the proposition, right? It's going to have to be part of the negotiations. Obviously, it's part of the negotiations. We're not talking at this point this is why there's a need for peace negotiations, for discussions. I'm not going to speak for the Israelis. I'm speaking about what we believe, and we believe a regain of the sovereignty, liberation of the South, bringing back our displaced, as in parallel to regaining sovereignty and controlling arms, is the approach that we will want to follow.
Okay, you're hoping it's going to work.
Listen. I genuinely believe that the Lebanese want peace. I genuinely believe Lebanese want prosperity. They want stability. All of them, not 80%, not 75%, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't want to speak for them, but I think we're all in the position right now where we are tired of wars. We are tired of instability. We're tired of violence. The last 6 weeks have been traumatic in a way that I'm sure we're going to be talking about economically, socially, humanity. We all want this to end. And I'm hoping that sane minds will prevail. And if we present it that way, eventually we can reach a positive conclusion.
So let's talk about the economy. The Lebanese economy was in tatters, according to the World Bank and other international observers, before the war. Now we know there is more than 1 million people displaced. We know there are many casualties, over 2,000. We know that Israeli airstrikes, namely, have destroyed a good chunk of the south of Lebanon. How do you foresee the reconstruction of Lebanon? And are you counting on some international help?
I mean, the point to make is, I'm going to repeat the point you made, which is that it's been a devastating 6 weeks on top of an economy that had barely started to recover in 25 after years of crisis, another war. Obviously, for people who know, we had a massive financial crisis, we had a huge explosion in the port, right? And now we have this absolutely devastating hit, right? The destruction, the physical destruction, we don't know yet. We're starting to do some surveys, geosatellite surveys, to try to get a feel. But it seems to be at least as big, if not even larger and bigger than what we saw in 24. And 2024 was already a very big destruction, right? It was $8 billion, $7 billion worth of destruction. Now it seems at least as big. We also have a massive economic losses, right? I mean, a huge chunk of this of the society is no longer working. Companies are closing, tourists are not coming, remittances are not flowing. It's absolutely devastating. And I have to say, listen, the Lebanese are resilient. I hate that word, but it is the truth. We're resilient. We're used to. We go through these things. It's painful that we have to go through them yet again, but we'll figure out a way we'll figure out a way to come out of the rubble, right? Two approaches. One approach is we're going to rely on ourselves. The Lebanese are still successful. There's a huge diaspora. We have a decent amount of savings. We could use that. Eventually, if peace comes back, if stability comes back, we will fund a lot of it. But in the interim, we need a bridge. There's no question about it. We need foreign funding to help us over the short term, right? And this is why, I'm in Washington right now, the IMF meetings. And that's the main reason why we're here, is to have a conversation with our partners to try to see how they can help us. The point I'm making, absolutely devastating. I think the Lebanese have it. They have what it takes to rebuild it if peace comes. But in the interim, we absolutely need our partners to help us.
So economic packages are being talked about as these negotiations are happening in parallel?
We are discussing absolutely two tracks. There is the humanitarian track, quite important. The cost of, again, 1.4 million displaced is almost 20% of our population. It's a huge number. It's a mind-boggling number, right? All in 6 weeks. The cost is enormous of just keeping them, feeding them, sleeping, the water, the health is an enormous bill. But then there's also the long-term effort, right, which we already need to start thinking about the day after, reconstruction, rebuilding this economy and build it better, hopefully. So we're working on both of these fronts. Humanitarian, short-term, but also long-term support eventually.
Are you seeing any role for Europe in helping Lebanon recover from this crisis?
Crucial role, actually, I would say primary role, right? And the Europeans have to sort of been incredibly supportive, both politically, but even recently economically. We do see them as our partners. At the end of the day, our Arab brothers and sisters will also be a very important part of any effort to help us. But the Europeans have been politically, socially, but also economically very supportive. And for that, I absolutely thank them. And I'm extremely thankful for that support.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Just one last question very quickly for me, for background. How many days of negotiations are we looking at in Washington? Is there a set number of days already, or we'll go
no, I don't think there's a preset. This, as people have noticed, I've said over, this is the introduction, this is the beginning, yeah. This is more of a laying the groundwork. Eventually, it's probably going to have to be a larger group and in a lengthier period. But this is the beginning. And again, our demand, our ask is this point is end of hostilities.
Yeah, but in the meantime, there is no ceasefire applying to Lebanon. That's a fact. There were airstrikes today again.
The violence is continuing in the south very, very clearly. Thankfully, Beirut seems to have been spared over the past few days. But absolutely, the attacks continue.
Okay. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time to talk to us.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.